In this video, we're going to explore and expand upon the idea of integrating models and views. Very exciting video. The page that you see here on the screen is going to walk us through and kind of structures a little bit what we're going to do and gives us an overview of what we're going to do. If you remember, we have the HR added application, and the HR added application gives us a lot of functionality, including our model. The www.myserver.com/HR/ what you see here, we've added that pattern, and so we already have that built into our web page, but we're going to expand upon that a little bit. At this point, we don't have a home page, for example. If we typed in www.myserver.com, that isn't going to work. We're going to get a 404 error. So how do we expand it so that we delegate the control and still have a home page? And I'll show you how to do that. But first, what we're going to do is we're going to look at expanding this and building on the idea of parameters, which we talked about a few videos ago. And the idea is going to be that if we have a pattern such that www.myserver.com/HR, and then suppose we want to look up a specific employee, then we could say /employee, let's say /1, or whatever that employee's number is. And what it would do then is it would print out the name of the employee. The pattern here, notice that this is under the HR pattern, so therefore it will be in the HR added application, because anything that uses that HR pattern is now going to be delegated down to the HR added application. But we expanded it a little bit, and the pattern here is going to be employee /, and the reason we put an employee in here is because there's probably a lot of things that go on in HR, right? We don't want to go HR/1 because HR might do a lot of different things. So we're going to put another layer in there so that it's specific and says that it's in the HR application, but we're going to do something for employees, and we want to find employee that is 1. Notice when you read that URL makes a lot of sense. It's almost literal in terms of what we're saying there. So this is going to be in the HR added app, and the idea is going to be to print the name of the employee. It's a couple things to notice here, which is really important, and this will make a lot more sense later. I wanted to walk you through this. There are multiple layers to this pattern, and those layers all make sense. So in this particular URL, this part of the pattern, the www.myserver.com/HR/, that indicates to Django that we want to transfer control to the HR added application. So the URLs.py that's in the company default app is going to recognize that pattern. It's going to delegate it down to the HR added application. And you've seen that so far. We did that a few times. But the next part of the pattern, that is the employee 1, that's got to be handled in the URLs.py file in the HR app. Because once the control is delegated, the HR added app then is responsible for handling the rest of that pattern. Now this part, I want to make sure I point it out to you because it could get a little confusing. For this part of this pattern, the root call, that is if we say www.myserver.com, we're asking for the company homepage. But I want you to think about this as still having two parts. The two parts each have the same pattern, but I want to make sure you understand it. The first part of the pattern is there is nothing after the slash. Okay, so therefore that is going to be the pattern is going to be simply an empty string. That is this right here. Now that's what we're going to use that to indicate that we're going to delegate control to a new added application called home. Home is going to take care of our home page requests. Okay, but once we get to home, remember we're going to transfer control to the urls.py file. Then in our new home, we still have to indicate what the pattern is down there. So because of that, there still is another pattern here. You can think of it this way if you wanted to, but it still might be a little confusing, but you can think of the first part of this pattern as being empty and the second part of the pattern as being empty. So once control gets transferred, again, there's going to be an empty pattern. That's also going to handle the home page. So let's walk through this carefully so that you understand how this works. We're going to work first on the HR one, then we're going to move to the home page. All right, so let's take a look. Let me pull up VS Code here. We already have our HR application. We already have our database. We have everything pretty much set up, but we do need to handle the new pattern. So I'm in the main URLs pattern here, the URLs file, and you'll notice that it is already set up to handle the pattern of HR. So we don't need to do anything to the one that is in the company default app because it's going to automatically transfer control if it sees that HR pattern. So let's go to the URLs file now in HR. Now this we do because in effect what we want is a pattern that looks like this. I'm going to copy this and make some changes. What we want is a pattern that looks like this. And we said 1, but remember that could be any number. So we want to set it up as a parameter. So we're going to say int, and we're going to call that, let's say, employee ID to make it quite literal. And then we're going to put another slash at the end. And we got to make sure, by the way, this is a common mistake. I do this myself. Don't forget this closing brace right here, because if you do, it will not work. So this brace has to be there and the slash to make sure that it works correctly. Now we're going to create a view called getEmployee. Again, I like those verb noun names because they're very literal. And we'll just call this the same thing, getEmployee. And we'll save. Let's make sure we haven't made any syntax errors here. I think that all looks pretty good. And we're getting an error. Let's see. Oh, that's because we have not created the view yet. So let's do that right now. I'm going to copy this to make sure I have the same name. Let's go to the view. And now let's create our new view. Def, remember, getEmployee, request, and then it had a parameter, so it's going to be employee ID. And that's going to pass in the name of the number of the employee that we want to get. We can say an employee equals employee, and this goes back to our, if you remember, our shell stuff. This is all the shell work that we did. Get, and we're going to say ID equals, and what's it going to equal? Well, the employee ID. All right. And that will get a specific employee because each employee ID is unique, so it'll get us a specific employee. And then once we do that, let's go ahead and print it just to make sure that we have it correct. You know, I like to do that. Put a space in there, and we'll say plus and str employee. And that'll make sure that we have the correct employee that is there. And then let's build an output string. So we'll say output equals, we're going to create a paragraph, and then we'll say the employee's name, let's say first name, employee dot first name, and then we want to put a space in there, space, and then we're going to concatenate the employee last name. Okay, and then we want to concatenate the closing HTML stuff, so it's going to be slash like that. And again, we might be good to print that out just to make sure we can see that. So I'm going to go ahead and print that out so we can see it on the screen. All right. And we're still, let's change this to output. There we go. And then we're going to return an HTTP string, HTTP response. We'll say output. All right. And that should get us a specific employee ID. So I'll save all. Okay, we're not getting any errors. That's a good sign. So let's take a look and let's try our pattern here. So I'm going to go over to Chrome. I'm going to say 127. Okay, and then of course we have not done a home page yet, so that's expected. Then we'll say HR. That's our home page. That's good. And then we want a specific employee. So we'll say employee /1, and do we get it? We get an error. And let's see here. Let's make sure we got the error correct here. I resumed this video because I wanted to double check. I do make mistakes just like you do, and I wanted to point out that this is objects and this is object, which it has to be the word object. So again, syntax error. Let's fix that. Let's try it one more time. Let's try it now and see if it works. And let's type in the number 1. Cross our fingers. We want employee. And we're going to say 1. There we go. Lorraine Robinson. And this is dynamic because every time you enter this, of course, you will get a new employee. All right, so that works. We got that part working. Let's work on now the second part. So this part is finished. Let me check that off. Oops. How about this? Oh, not that either. How about this? There we go. Okay, now let's work on the root. The root is important because we're going to have a home page, right? So let's make sure that we get the home root is done. Now we have a little bit more work to do with this. It's simpler in its implementation, but there's a few more details because we have to, for example, we have an HR app but we don't have a home app. What we want to do is we want to transfer control. Whenever there's a root request, www.serva.com, we want to transfer control to a different application. So let's try it again. We're going to say, let's create our application. Python manage.py start app, and we'll call it home. Now that creates the home app, and if you look, it is right here. Okay. And now that we've got the home app, remember we have to hook it in. We have to hook it in. The Django does not know it's there unless we explicitly hook it in. So let's just copy and paste a little bit here. Make sure it's hooked in. Then Django will know about it. We call it home. And I'm just making modifications here to keep it simple. All right, and we'll say file save all. And now that hooks it in. So Django knows now that that exists. We can close that out. And we want to transfer control. Whenever there's a root request, we want to transfer control to the home.urls file. So let's go ahead and set that up. So instead of the path being HR, the path is going to be home. Actually, the path is going to be an empty string, because whenever that is an empty string, that's what's going to transfer it to the home.urls file, like that. All right, so let's file. We're going to save all. Now, of course, what we need to do is we need to create this home.urls file, because as I've mentioned to you, Django does not create it by default. So I'm going to right-click and say New File. And we'll urls.py. And I copy and paste a lot when I use Django, because there is a lot of redundancy. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to copy this. I like to have this at the end there. And I'm going to copy and paste this right here, this whole file actually. So I have it. Close this and let's go to our urls.home that we just created and paste. All right, now the pattern that we need here is going to be the empty pattern. We can use go home again. We don't want to call it HR home because we've already got one of those. So let's call it main home. We're not going to need that. This will forward control to the go home that is in our home default added application. And so this will transfer control if it is a root request, as I mentioned to you earlier. So we're going to say file, save all. And let's go now over to views. We're going to create a go home app here. And it's going to be very simple. All we're going to do is we're going to return an HTTP response. And it's going to simply be, welcome to my company. And now we've got, if I can spell company, C-O-M-P-A-N-Y. There we go. All right. And now we've got this. Now the one thing we do need to do is import, of course, the HTTP response. There we go. And we'll say file, save all. And now we've hopefully got everything set up here. Let's try this. We've got our employees. We've got a root for the HR homepage. We've got to start our web server. Always a good idea. Believe me, you'll do this too, right? You forget to restart the web server every time you use that command line. There we go. All right, let's try one more time. We've got an HR homepage, yes. And do we have a homepage for my company? Yes, we do. So walk through this carefully. If you want a little bit of a challenge, create a products app and create a pattern that allows you to access products. Create a products table, work with some models, and build a products homepage that lists all the products on the page for your company. Thanks.